Hello, I'm Maria Williams with the Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE enjoys bringing you the latest environmental health science through our partnership calls and webinars, science serves, publications, and social media. I would like to welcome everyone to today's CHE partnership webinar, which is titled At the Crossroads, Forging New Intersections Between Environmental and Reproductive Justice Through Research and Advocacy. Our moderator today is Karen Wang, Director of CHE. We will leave time following the presentations for a brief Q&A session. You may type in questions through the Q&A feature available on the menu bar at the top of your window at any point during the presentations. After the presentations, our moderator will read out questions for our panelists to respond to. We will get to as many comments and questions as we can during the Q&A period. For those of you who called in on the phone, we have posted slides to accompany today's webinar on our website. You can download these by going to healthandenvironment.org. Please scroll to the bottom of the page and select today's webinar. On the webinar page is a link to the slides. Everyone on the webinar right now is muted with the exception of our moderator and our speakers. This webinar is scheduled to last for 45 minutes and is being recorded for our call and webinar archive. With that, I'll turn things over to you, Karen.
Great, thanks Maria. Hi everyone, I'm Karen Wang, the Director of the Collaborative on Health and the Environment. I want to welcome everyone to the 5th webinar in our series, 20 Pioneers Under 40 in Environmental Public Health. In case you are not familiar, the series features researchers and advocates that were chosen for exceptional levels of accomplishment for environmental health work that is rigorous, dynamic, and builds critical knowledge. Today, we're really excited to have Nourbese Flint and Dr. Zota talk to us about forging new intersections between environmental justice and reproductive justice through research and advocacy. Using a lens of social and racial inequality and reproductive health disparities, they will talk about toxic chemical exposure through the use of personal and beauty products. Our first speaker for today is Nourbese Flint. She serves as the Policy Director and Manager of Reproductive Justice Programs at Black Women for Wellness. There she directs reproductive and environmental health policy, organizes community advocacy, and manages reproductive and sexual health programming. Our next speaker will be Dr. Zota. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health at the George Washington University Milken School of Public Health. Her research examines population exposures to environmental chemicals, their effects on women and children's health, and implications of these risks for health disparities. I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Nourbese Flint.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here. My name is Nourbese Flint again. I'm Policy Director at Black Women for Wellness. And before I get started, I wanted to say just what a here with you all to talk about this subject near and dear to my heart, and then also with presenting with Ami. Ami and Bhavna are giants in the field, and they are the ones that I turn to in terms of research. Just to talk a little bit about what I'm going to share today. So most people know that, or not most people know, but research, the agenda that I wanted to talk to, I wanted to give you guys the agenda on what we're going to talk about today, just because I know a lot of times when people they get antsy of trying to figure out what's going on, so I broke down the agenda. And that is going to be talking a little bit about Black Women for Wellness, taking a little bit about an intersectional approach, and why this subject is so important to us, a little bit about the research itself, and also looking at beauty and those intersections between beauty and environmental toxins. Black Women for Wellness is an organization committed to the empowerment, health, and well-being of Black women and girls. We are 20, going on 21 years of age, so we're almost legal. We're based in Los Angeles, and we are a reproductive justice organization. And for those of you who are not familiar with reproductive justice, it's really just an intersectional look on how we look at people's whole beings. And we use that intersectional way of approaching the issues and problems that we're trying to face. So next slide. There you go. Black stylists, so why this topic? Black stylists are a staple and an economic backbone to many Black communities. In particular, our first millionaires have been stylists. Stylists have been instrumental into the part of some of our movements, particularly because they are independent contractors, so they're able to give money and not give money in ways that other folks haven't. And it's also a place where culture is exchanged. I don't know if many folks know, but before Ava DuVernay became this worldwide director star, she was known in South Los Angeles in particular of the person who went to both beauty shops and barbershops and shared information, set trailers for the new movies and all those things. So it's a place of also information. Again, the beauty industry is also growing with Black women leading the charge. Black women spend 2 to 4 times as much money on beauty products. We could see this with Fenty when they came out with their new makeup products in darker colors, and that was sold out, still being sold out. But even with all the hair care and makeup, hair is the one thing that we are leading in that kind of dwarfs the beauty care or the rest of the makeup industry. In addition to why this topic, in particular for Black Women for Wellness, the impacts of toxins in hair and beauty products on health, we've always really wanted to look at, with all this money and stuff in hair care products and in makeup products, is there an intersection when looking at the health disparities and health inequities that we see in Black women and girls in our communities? So just to set the stage, Black women spend an estimated about $9 billion in the beauty industry, with Black women spending almost 80% more on beauty products than white women. And then in the last Nielsen's report, about 2/3 of Black women feel that maintaining a youthful appearance is important. And about half of the Black women surveyed have bought skincare item, cosmetic, or perfume in the last 12 months. Black women have a tendency to spend more on feminine hygiene products, personal soap products, women's fragrance, ethnic health and beauty aids, and on healthcare per buyer compared to white women. So who gets to be beautiful? And I think this is an important question when we're looking at how and why some of these trends we see in hair care and in the beauty industry, and why it's so prevalent, or one of the reasons why it's so prevalent among Black women and women of color in general. So some of you might have seen this in the New York Times last year. I won't read the whole thing, but I really wanted to highlight this part, one part of this quote, which is, ignoring the narrow beauty standards of some African-American women are held to. Miss Rhines chose a performer who was older, darker skinned, and less classically beautiful than Miss Washington, or for that matter, Halle Berry. And this was in reference to Viola Davis. And so I really wanted to dive in of the word classical beauty and where does that come from and what does that mean? The very ideas of femininity is steeped in beauty. We see this with Disney, we see this in the media, that women who are the most feminine are the ones that look, quote unquote, the most beautiful. The hair is done, makeup is done, nails are done, things like that. And then on the extra layer of it, it also is a certain type of hair, skin color, and other things that are reinforced of what is actually beauty, right? So folks who are lighter skinned with straighter hair are considered beautiful. And folks who have darker skin, who have more texture in their hair are seen less in kind of quote unquote the scale of beauty. And it also reinforces structuralized racism with the ideas of who can be beautiful and who can't. And I wanted to also take a moment here, particularly to talk about Black women and why this is important. A lot of times that we look at beauty as this very kind of superficial kind of like process, but there's actual real, what we call like racial capital that can come out of it. Folks who are seen as more beautiful and seen as more attractive can have better job opportunities, can have can reach their a different group of spouses, our partners, and also have different access to media and who are we looking for into the information. And then in particular, when we look at Black women, I think there is also this kind of extra layer of being dehumanized and looking at less feminine with kind of racism and stereotypes of Black women. So the ideas of the beauty regimen can add to this idea of trying to be seen in humanity in America, in places, right, to be seen as more human and also as more feminine. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight a little bit about how Black women's hair can be political. So a lot of times we think about hair care and how people wear their hair is really thinking about their styling, but with Black women, you wearing your hair naturally can be seen as making a political statement. I think a lot of us remember with the New Yorker, they had a picture of Michelle Obama in this kind of huge afro and some other things, and I have never seen Michelle Obama in an afro in my life, but what they were trying to do was make a statement about her being radical, right? Just by changing her hair. So this is a definition of racial capital. It's capital resource drawn from the body that can be related to skin tone, facial features, hair, and body shapes that is attached to white bodies. This is from a great book that I also need to put in my references, but really trying to reinforce the conversation about how beauty actually has very tangible impacts, and the beauty regimen can have an actual very tangible impact. So why is this important, and why am I discussing chemicals or beauty when we're just thinking about chemical exposure? And for one, I wanted to talk about why we need to understand the whys before we create solutions. A lot of times when we're doing this work, folks will be like, well, why don't just Black women stop using these products? But there's a why there that I think we really need to understand. And when we understand all the issues and cultural pressures of beauty, then we can really start thinking about what the solutions are and think of beyond the expanse of let's just change the chemicals in these products, or let's just try to say that, oh, you shouldn't use these products. The second is it also informs the work, in particular what questions to ask. Right? So if we are thinking about and wanting to move into our work around hair care or chemical exposure, a question that we might not have necessarily thought about was, is your corporation have some type of corporate dress code or corporate look that can impact whether or why a certain woman would use certain issues? Because if she has to wear straight hair or hair in a certain way to be seen seriously at work or to be a part of the rules, then that's an extra layer of things that we think we would know that causes why somebody would use a certain product. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time, or my last couple of minutes with you all, talking about BWFILL Research. So we've done literature reviews, surveys, focus groups, and interviews. We started in 2009 up into 2016, really wanting to look at the hair care industry, particularly stylists, and also the impact of toxins, or start the information gathering on if there's impact on toxins and or a link between toxins and toxins in hair care products and what Black women and some of the health impacts that we've been seeing, or health disparities that we've been seeing in South Los Angeles. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into some of the chemicals that we've used, because I know Ami is going to talk a lot more about these. But I did want to highlight sodium hydroxide and calcium hydroxide, which is found in relaxers, because this is the chemical that actually makes the product work. So yes, it's been linked to a lot of different things, including fibroids, but it's also the chemical that is what permanently straightened hair. And so if folks want to have permanently straightened hair, right, we are probably thinking of some really bad chemicals we need to use. So it's also something we need to think about when we are trying to figure out how we can make things less toxic, or the conversations that we're having in communities of color around hair care and the chemicals in it. Most of the common form of toxic chemicals that we've seen in the folks that we were talking to with our stylists were endocrine disruptors, hair dyes, and of course calcium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide. That came up quite a bit in the products that we were that we gathered for the stylists that we interviewed and did surveys with. I just also want to flag here that for professional cosmetics, there is no disclosure on product. And so we actually can't gather that information, which is something that we are working on the policy-wise this year with Black Women for Wellness. The last thing really quickly, I wanted to highlight one of the things that the stylists were talking about when we asked them about product safety. Many of them thought the majority of the products that they were using on their shelves were safe, and the products that they were buying were safe. Everybody had some idea around relaxers, and maybe that wasn't great, but everything else, they thought somebody was regulating the products and making sure that it was safe to use, even though that there were real clear health issues that were going on with Black women, Black women stylists. One person told us, my friend, 20 years in the industry, doesn't have any fingerprints anymore. My friend can't go to the DMV and put her hands down. And that's from using the hair care products on a regular, consistent basis. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is that even though a lot of folks complained about eye irritations or other things, there was a very low use of actual protective gear. And so things like aprons and gloves and goggles and eye protectors with the lowest use. The most of those used were aprons, but eye goggles or eye protection was probably about 3% of stylists. These are some of the top health issues that we categorized, or that was reported to us from the stylists that we talked to. I thought it was really interesting that some said none, and then when we asked them again in a different way, that they named all these health issues. And so there's the other thing I would say, there's a little bit of disconnect with thinking about their health and then thinking about their workplace environment, and that there could be the workplace environment could be causing some of these health issues, or impacting some of the health issues that they are experiencing. Lastly, some of the toxic chemicals in the products, what makes it work. So I said a little bit about that. There is a new wave of embracing more natural styles that is driving products to be more green, but that also is leading to more green issues, or greenwashing. That is more and more, so products saying that they're healthy, but they're not really. As we move towards folks trying to embrace or be more cognizant of their hairstyles, or like what chemicals they're using on their body. And solutions need to be intersectional when we think about policy, when we think about culture change, is in thinking about how we are looking at ways of both like workplace, economics, and all these other things that can impact the way and reasons why people use products. This is special thanks to the team that helped worked with this research. That's Tinny, Marissa, Ambria, who've all worked in different phases of this work. And that is it for me.
My name is Dr. Ami Zota, and I will continue. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Occupational Health at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health. And I'm going to continue the conversation that Nourbese so eloquently started on forging new intersections between environmental and reproductive justice, really with an eye towards research and how research can help develop these intersections as well as integrative solutions. So, you know, what we're really, in terms of environmental exposures, what we're talking about today is our invisible chemical environment. So these are synthetic industrial chemicals that are used widely in a large range of consumer products. I feel like Che has done a great job of highlighting speakers that talk about these chemicals, how we're exposed, and some of their health effects. One of my unique frames and contributions to this field is really examining consumer product chemicals and reproductive health disparities through an EJ/RJ lens. And so that's really looking at how the interplay between environmental chemicals exposures, reproductive health, and social inequities, really from a multi-generational, transgenerational perspective, taking a life course approach. As Nourbese mentioned, part of this is looking at these issues with an eye towards intersectionality. So really that the impacts of race, class, gender, sexual identity are not only additive, but integrative. And in order to do that, from a scientific perspective, I've really highlighted or chosen to take a highly multidisciplinary approach that includes exposure science, epidemiology, the social sciences, as well as epigenetics. So today, I'm going to talk with you briefly about both some of the conceptual work I've done to advance these issues, as well as the empirical scientific work. And really, I see kind of the goals of this work are to go beyond just documenting disparities, racial, ethnic disparities in exposure and outcomes, to finding modifiable drivers of these inequities so that we can actually intervene and improve health and quality of life, and ultimately to secure environmental justice and improve equity in women's health through advancing science, kind of clinical practice, as well as policy. So the first case study I'm going to talk about really dovetails nicely with Nourbese's presentation. And it's something that I call the environmental injustice of beauty. And that is really about framing beauty product use and the consequent chemical exposures within an environmental justice and health disparities framework. So my work, among many others in the field of environmental health, has documented racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals, such as phthalates, often using biomonitoring data. So here's some work that my students and I have done using the NHANES data set from the CDC's. This is 2 particular phthalates commonly found in beauty and personal care products. Here we see significant racial ethnic differences in the body burden of these phthalates as measured by urine. However, most of the environmental health research has kind of stopped at just documenting these exposure disparities and hasn't really dug into what's driving these disparities, either by proximate sources or upstream sources. So to address this data gap, I worked with the social scientist, Bhavna Shamasunder, at Occidental College, who Nourbese mentioned, and we developed this framework and wrote this commentary that was published in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So it's one of the most go-to clinical journals for OBGYN practitioners, where we were highlighting the connections between environmental justice and beauty product related chemical exposures. So importantly, you see the gray boxes there on the right, and that's kind of had typically been the most common framework of thinking about consumer product chemicals. So really looking at individual product use, individual exposure, and adverse health outcomes. We really wanted to highlight that product use at the individual level really occurs in a social and economic context. And if you really want to intervene on product use, you have to understand why people are using these products, which we argue can be impacted by all those factors on the left, everything from marketing and advertising to structural racism, rules and dress codes, as well as internal factors. So in this commentary, we argued that and illustrated that racial ethnic differences in cosmetic use occur across multiple product care categories, including hair, skincare, as well as feminine care product use. Structural racism can influence beauty product use, beauty norms in product use. And these beauty product use can contribute to disparities in chemical exposures and health outcomes. We also highlighted the potential for cumulative impacts. So these often some of the same women that are exposed to elevated chemicals from beauty products may also live in neighborhoods where there's high air pollution and or work in environments like beauty salons or nail care salons where they face elevated exposures. So there could be this potential for cumulative impacts. In the commentary, we illustrated 3 examples of the environmental injustice of beauty. These are summarized here. So, really looking at skin lighteners, its association with colorism and potential impacts from mercury toxicity, hair texture preferences, which Nourbese spoke about, how it may increase exposures to parabens and placenta, and how those have, there is evidence linking that to uterine fibroids and endocrine disruption, as well as perceived odor discrimination, and how this may lead to increased use of feminine care products like vaginal douches and talc powder, and their associations with gynecologic cancers and endocrine disruption. Really just putting a conceptual framework to some of the issues that Nourbese spoke about, and you can read about these further in that commentary. The last 2 examples, I'd like to provide kind of more empirical case studies. The first is on cumulative impacts of chemical exposures during pregnancy. So here, we in this case study, we're focusing on inflammation pathways. So these are more about biological processes that can drive some of the adverse pregnancy and postpartum outcomes often found in women of color, including preterm birth as well as depression. And so inflammation may be an important pathway by which chemicals affect these outcomes. There's also a need to look at health impacts of chemical mixtures. As I mentioned, this is an issue for kind of the general population, but especially for some of our vulnerable populations that face elevated exposures to multiple sources. And there's also a need to consider how common comorbidities among communities of color, like obesity, have the potential to modify impacts of chemicals. So a lot of these issues have been raised often by EJ communities, but the evidence is still playing, the scientific evidence is still playing catch up. So we are looking at these issues in a population, a study. We're taking advantage of an mindful eating intervention study that was done among overweight and obese pregnant women in the San Francisco Bay Area, where the majority were women of color, low income. And we measured a range of consumer product chemicals, including PBDE flame retardants, their hydroxylated metabolites, PCBs, as well as the poly and perfluorinated compounds in serum during 2nd trimester. And then we measured inflammation and cellular aging biomarkers like telomere length at 3 time points, and during pregnancy and at 3 and 9 months postpartum. So we had repeated measures data. So we had about over 300 measurements on 100 women. And here are some results in progress. So we do see that some of our chemical measures like PBDEs and PFASs are associated with increased levels of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, notably IL-6 and TNF-alpha, suggesting that they may be pro-inflammatory. We also did a chemical mixtures analysis using weighted quantile sum regression, and found that a 2-fold increase in the chemical mixture index was associated with a 36% increase in IL-6 during pregnancy. And so that quantitative effect estimate is actually greater than you can see up on the graph, either of the orange estimates of either of the individual chemicals. We also looked at obesity as a potential effect modifier. So, you know, our population only includes overweight and obese women. It does not include women with kind of more normal weight profiles. But even in the, you know, even just between overweight and obese, we do find stronger associations among the obese women. In this population, about 60% had a BMI over 30 obese. So this suggests that, you know, obesity may modify chemical effects of chemicals. So now I want to go to the third case study, and this is here we're really trying to develop a socio-exposome model of uterine fibroids. And just a little bit about uterine fibroids. I didn't actually know that much about fibroids until about 5 years ago when I came to GW and I met with some of the OBGYN clinicians, and I thought I was going to study pregnancy complications like preterm delivery. And he said, you know, if you really want to study something that impacts the quality of life of the majority of the women we see, he said, study fibroids. And you know, that really stuck with me. And the more I kind of dug into this, the more I really realized there's kind of a need for innovative research to kind of understand this condition and create new interventions. So uterine fibroids are non-cancerous hormone-dependent tumors. About 70% of premenopausal women will have fibroids. A lot of them are asymptomatic, but about 25 to 30% will be affected by symptoms, including difficulty getting pregnant, pregnancy complications, a lot of heavy bleeding and pelvic pain. It can interfere with healthy reproduction in multiple ways. In one, as I mentioned, it can lead to poor pregnancy outcomes and infertility. But also because one of the only permanent treatments available are surgery, largely hysterectomy. And so often you have women getting hysterectomies, especially Black women, in the prime of their reproductive years. Black women are disproportionately impacted. Not only do they get more fibroids, but they're more severe. And the economic burden of fibroids has been estimated to be greater than breast or ovarian cancer. The etiology and root causes of these racial disparities are unknown. And, you know, mostly in the literature, race has been really looked at through a biological lens. And so in this study, we're really trying to understand those kind of socio-environmental factors driving some of these racial disparities. So we've been doing this pilot study at George Washington with 60 women undergoing surgery for their fibroids. We measured phthalates and phenols, which are, you know, come from a lot of personal care products, including beauty products, but also food and the home environment. We measure those in urine. We're looking at epigenetic modifications as potential mediating factors. So we've started looking at these microRNA epigenetic markers in both blood as well as fibroid tissue collected during surgery from these patients. Got demographic and medical information, and we're also collecting information on social factors, both through qualitative interviews and perceived stress surveys. You can see a little bit about the population. It is a really unique population. So these are women, and mostly in their late 30s and 40s. 65% are Black or African American, highly educated, and most of them are on private insurance, highly educated. So, you know, a unique sample for an environmental epi study. About 60% are getting myomectomies, and, you know, there's quite a range in fibroid size and uterine volume. And here we're thinking about uterine volume as kind of an aggregate measure of fibroid burden, because as you can see, many women have multiple fibroids. This data, which is a work in progress, we're finding that 2 of the high molecular weight phthalates, DEHP and DIMP, are associated with a greater uterine volume. as is our cumulative phthalates index. So this is kind of suggestive of our hypothesis that these endocrine disrupting chemicals may be contributing to fibroid growth and severity. This is just a little bit of work on the microRNAs. So these are small non-coding RNA molecules that regulate post-transcriptional gene expression. The volcano plot on the right is showing differences in microRNA expression between the tissue and the healthy uterine tissue right beside it. So this is kind of confirming what other studies have shown. And then of the microRNAs that were differentially expressed in fibroid and myometrium, one in fibroid tissue is also significantly varies by between women with low and high DEHP exposure. So this is very much a work in progress, but just kind of wanted to show you how we're starting to think and look at the epigenetic data in this model. And I should just say that, you know, one of the other exciting parts about doing this work at GW has been that, you know, just working on a health disparities issue has attracted a lot of women of color trainees to, you know, want to work on this project. So it's been a great way to develop the pipeline and, you know, get some of these trainees, you know, acquainted and familiar with not only biomedical research and public health research, but kind of emerging topics in epigenetics. So concluding remarks, our program there at GW, my lab, is forging new intersections between environmental and reproductive justice by developing both novel conceptual frameworks and original empirical evidence. The long-term goals of this work are to, you know, link it back to securing environmental justice and improving equity in women's health through advancements in science, policy, and clinical practice. With that, I'd like to thank my collaborators both at GW in the School of Public Health, as well as in the Department of OBGYN, as well as my external collaborators and funding sources. And with that, I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start out with a question so that if any attendees have questions, you can type them into either the chat box or the Q&A box. My question is for Nourbese first. When you guys then go out into the community when you are doing your surveys and interviews and talk to the stylists about the science, what was their reaction?
So there was a lot. There's a couple of things. The first thing, we had to like gain their trust because there is a lot of different things going on in South Los Angeles in particular. And the first thing they thought that we were trying to essentially take their salons away because there's been some gentrification happening. And so once we were like, no, we're not here to like survey and like kick you out and do something else with your building. Folks actually were really interested and started after time, because we had to go back a couple of times to get information and to do the focus groups and to build the relationships. Started to wanting to know more about the products, but also telling us stories about how, you know, we didn't learn about this in cosmetology school. We learned about how not to blow things up, but we didn't really learn about the health impacts, and wanting to know more information about what's in these products, how they can keep themselves safer, what are we doing with it, and also joining us in policy kind of initiatives and things that we've been pushing.
Okay, great. We had one question. Has work been done looking at social economic status level, product use, and chemical exposure? Are those with higher social economic status likely to buy and use more products, or vice versa?
I can just start by, you know, I mean, so, you know, people have looked at how some of these chemicals vary by SES, and, you know, I mean, I think the results are a bit mixed and depend by study and by chemical. You know, I think what we really need to be doing is looking at SES within kind of different racial groups and, even within different products. So for example, skincare products, skin whiteners are an issue globally. And, often in many of these countries, it's actually more of the higher SES populations that are using some of these products, as gateway, as almost like a gateway into opportunity.
Great. Nourbese, we have a question for you. You mentioned working on policy to require disclosures of chemical ingredients in beauty products. Could you talk more about what policy changes are you working towards, and is that advocacy at the federal level, state, or local?
So we're working at the state level and city level, mostly because the federal level, one, takes a lot of time, and two, given what's going on at the federal level right now, there seems to be a more emphasis on deregulation than actual making things safer for folks. So right now we're working on professional cosmetic disclosure, because right now you can go into a store, a retail store, and turn around the packets and see what the ingredients are. And that's, one, helps consumers, but particularly it also helps us as nonprofit folks and researchers, because I thought there was, when I first got into this work, that there was some like magical database of like all ingredients in all these products. But in order for us to find out what are in these products, we literally had to turn the bottles and containers around to see what they're in. And professional cosmetics do not have that. They have safety data sheets that tell you some of the important chemicals that are in it, but it's not full disclosure. And even with retail, there's not full disclosure in terms of fragrance. And so we're working to see if we can get, our first step is doing the professional cosmetics and getting those ingredients in. And then in prior years, or next years and moving forward, we really want to look at how we can start regulating some of these chemicals, get funding for the Safe Cosmetics Act that we passed here, but is actually no funding in order to regulate any of the chemicals or any of the products are on our shelves. Looking at some of those intersectional spaces of like economic opportunities for women, particularly women of color, looking at like housing and things like that, because we do know that those things kind of layer on each other. So if we can't be working on health inequity in terms of chemical exposure without actually working on like job opportunities for people, because we know they'll go hand in hand. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. We had another participant just ask for Nourbese, when you talked about change beyond just policy or just recommendations not to use certain products, can you talk more about what intersectional environmental justice, reproductive justice change looks like?
Right. And so that's a great question. I think for me, it starts with kind of a culture shift of what is acceptable beauty standards. So like when we talk about things around classical beauties, right, which I think the writer actually was trying to give a compliment to Viola Davis at that point of her being like not a classic beauty on screen. What does that actually mean? And so for us, it's having more diverse groups of people on film, on television, on media, who have a variety of hair textures and skin colors. That is having conversations within the community about what is, like, how do we not kind of reinforce, I want to say not only patriarchy, but kind of like racial ideas of what is considered beauty in the neighborhood. So it's that having conversations to folks about how you can wear your hair and things like that. Also looking at some of the structural issues, again, of looking of how do we create and make sure that folks are not forced or funneled into ways of beauty in order as like survival, right? So if we have, if folks have housing and that live in places where have affordable housing, and that's an important part, right? Then there might be the less pressure off of to conform to a beauty standard in order to like get a way in. Same thing with corporate structures and how there's different hair requirements to be taken seriously. So both in journalism, sometimes like people have asked Black journalists to like wear their hair in a certain way. In corporations, they have asked people to like, you know, wear their hair in a certain way. In the army, they have asked, or military, they've asked their people to wear their hair in a certain way. And particularly for Black women, having to conform to these standards also actually means that we need to use more products to do that. So I think that is a start. I know Ami might have some like insight to that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you've, you know, highlighted a lot of the main points, but I think part of it is just understanding how some of these issues interact to kind of find the right points of intervention. Yeah, that's all.
Great. I have one final question for you, Ami, about case number 2. You talked about obesity moderating the effect of chemicals on sort of reproductive outcomes. And, you know, I think that there is some research showing that chemicals may actually lead to obesity or cause obesity or predispose people to obesity. So how do you tease apart, you know, the fact that there might be kind of a bidirectional effect here?
Yeah, I think that's a really great, you know, it's a really great question because, you know, you know, I mean, I really think that we're going to need a lot more research, and this is a pretty active area of research for kind of in the endocrine disrupting chemicals space because, you know, obesity, as you said, chemicals can be associated with obesity. It can modify the effect of chemicals on other outcomes like these inflammation outcomes, or, you know, it could also be that because chemicals affect obesity, that's then leading to these other downstream changes, whether that be cardiovascular disease or something else. So, you know, we're going to need some pretty sophisticated statistical methods, and you know, I think this kind of the data I presented here is just kind of a drop in the bucket to, you know, to begin to start to understand these issues. But I must say we were definitely surprised that we saw even differences between overweight and obese women, even in this kind of pilot study, which suggests that, you know, the signal may be quite strong.
Okay, great. I actually see 2 other questions that are kind of related. So even though we're going over a little bit, I'm going to ask them. One asks about, you know, Nourbese, you mentioned brands like Fenty, which are being more inclusive. Are you aware of any work being done with them to help shift representation in terms of traditional beauty? And another participant asked, you know, what platforms do you think it's best to have these types of conversations on about traditional beauty? How can we better use social media to empower women of color? So I think those 2 are kind of related.
Mm-hmm. I think so I'm not aware of anybody teaming up with like Fenty or anybody else. I think what into a marketplace where particularly dark-skinned Black women or dark-skinned folks in general were really wanting to have more makeup products. There usually is this like a range of stuff for folks who are a little bit lighter skin, and then for like us, it'll be like mocha, ebony. That's it. Like there's not any like range of color there. And so I think what Fenty is doing and leading the charge is like if you look on their Instagram and their Facebook and all of their social media, you will see a lot of different pictures of different shades of women being highlighted. And like their color. And so it's a great marketing scheme, right? And as soon as the Fenty came out with that, there was a ton of other companies that didn't release their kind of new shades for dark-skinned women trying to like pick up on this, right? So I think there's more work that we can probably do as folks in the nonprofit NGO world and having conversations about how do we expand the ideas around beauty. But it's also a place that we can need to also be careful that we don't also reinforce standards of beauty that are you know, like, oh, now you have more colors where you can like have a smoother complexion, but then also reinforce these ideas of what femininity looks like and what it, the ideas of what it looks like to be pretty, right? Because it should be the full range. If folks want to wear makeup, they can. If they don't, they don't, and there's no chastising on it. And so that's that. But in terms of the platforms, I think social media is a great space, but I also do think that to have more of these conversations in bigger spaces, in movie screens in particular, and film and television, I think is really just as important. And just as we have this movement to have, you know, not to undercut the kind of the issues around sexual harassment that's going with the Me Too and more women are standing up. I do think that we need another movement or additional movement to really start examining the ideas of what it looks like and how to, what is pretty, what is beautiful, and having those conversations, and also just showing the representation. Sometimes you don't need to have to actually have the conversation. If you just have this range of people on screen talking about their lives, and it also means that when people are behind the screens doing that, that also brings that diversity and conversation to the screen, right? Like how Blackish does and Brownish does, talks about these issues around beauty and hair that's just weaved into the story.
I just wanted to add something on that too, is, I mean, I think another part of it is just using innovative methods, you know, to translate the science that we do have on personal care and beauty product chemicals so that it reaches a broader audience and you know, can help be part of this conversation. You know, even when we published this environmental justice beauty commentary, you know, we made sure it was open access, and we've, you know, really been really surprised by all the feedback we've gotten and how much it has kind of instigated or inspired conversation, especially on social media. Like one blog magazine even, you know, moved forward with making this 1.5-minute video, which I found to be really compelling and accessible, and, you know, something that, you know, I clearly don't have the skills to do alone. But I think we need more of that type of stuff and more of those type of tools and kind of translating our scientific messages to a broader audience. I mean, I think a lot of us on, you know, on this webinar take this information for granted. But, you know, even when we were publishing this commentary, one of my OBGYN colleagues had to just remind me that one of the basic messages to even OBGYNs at this point is still that, you know, there is evidence that these chemicals in these products can adversely impact health.
Okay, great. I think that's all the time we have for now. Thank you so much for both of your great presentations. Maria?
Thank you, Karen. We are approaching the end of today's webinar. A video recording will be available on the CHE website soon, and tomorrow you will receive an email containing a link to the video. CHE's next call from the CHE Alaska Partnership will take place next Wednesday, January 31st, and is titled State of the Science, Children's Environmental Health in Alaska and the Circumpolar North. CHE's next webinar in this series, 20 Pioneers Under 40 in Environmental Public Health, will take place on Tuesday, February 6th, and is titled Using Molecular Epidemiology to Understand Toxic Threats to Early Life Children's Health. To learn more and to RSVP, please visit our website at healthandenvironment.org. If you are new to CHE and would like to stay updated about upcoming events and more, please sign up to receive our newsletter by selecting the Join Us tab at the top of any page on our website. Additionally, if you appreciate these CHE Partnership webinars, bringing you the latest environmental health research for free, we encourage you to support CHE's ongoing work by making a tax-deductible donation via our secure website. Again, our website is healthandenvironment.org. With that, I would like to thank our speakers once more for taking the time to present today, and Karen for her excellent moderation. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.